2NURFM.com, a broadcast service of the University of Newcastle.
Jim is Associate Professor in Politics at the University of Newcastle, and it's been a rather interesting week to be a retired judge, Jim.
Good morning, Meryl.
Good morning. Dyson Heydon somewhat of a bit of strife, you might say, but then making a decision that, no, in the fair-minded person's opinion, he wouldn't be slanted by going along to a Liberal Party fundraiser and being the guest speaker.
Well, yes, it's an interesting judgment on his own ability, and certainly he's shown confidence that he can be fair and impartial. One might reflect on that in terms of some of the questions that he's asked of the Leader of the Opposition while the Leader of the Opposition was actually at the Royal Commission, and some of those questions were, shall we say, fairly probing. Some of them perhaps might be regarded by a fair-minded person as fairly strongly worded type questions, but that to one side, I mean, the whole Royal Commission issue is very much a political operation, regardless of the way in which the people who chair those commissions, and I think we need to sort of acknowledge that people who chair the commissions generally tend to try and be as fair and impartial as possible. In this particular case, the possibility that Justice Heydon might have been less than impartial because he was going to address a Liberal Party function of which he wasn't necessarily aware, at least in his understanding. This is a bit of a stretch in some respects because the association of the Liberal Party with the function has been fairly consistent over the years, and especially given the person in whose honour it was. However, putting that to one side, it's probably worth just reflecting a little bit on the role of Royal Commissions, and they serve an interesting function within the operation of government. They provide an opportunity for controversial issues to be addressed independently of the Parliament. They give the government of the day some breathing space. They allow the government to sort of set up an inquiry on important issues. They allow some issues to be given much more airspace, allow citizens, if you like, an opportunity to have important issues explored. There is a bit of I suppose, Meryl, a political joke that often does the rounds with Royal Commissions, is that governments never set up a Royal Commission unless they know the answer.
The outcome,
They
yes.
already have an outcome in mind. And in the history of Australian politics, the Royal Commissions are often foregone conclusions. The government knows what it's looking for. Now, in the case of this particular Royal Commission, it's quite clear that they're wanting to do some damage to the Labor Party as much as they possibly can. And there are, I think, some fairly important issues underlying that as well. It's not just simply that the government is just acting politically. We expect that. But the other dimension to that, Meryl, is that there is probably some case to answer on the part of some unions within the labour movement to explain some of their relationships to employer groups and the way in which they've operated. Whether that warranted a Royal Commission is another matter, but that's a political judgment made by the Prime Minister, and who was quite keen to have a Royal Commission because that gave maximum opportunity to do some damage to the Labor Party. And I think when we look at the process, if you like, if we look at the Royal Commission as a political instrument, this is largely what's happening. Now, the people who chair them, like Justice Heydon, they're sort of brought in to give an air and a fairly reasonable picture of balance and impartiality, so that when they hand down their findings, we can have some confidence, Meryl, that it's based on the evidence that's presented and some degree of rational judgment about that evidence.
I think it's interesting. He did say, and this is Dyson Heydon, he's the a highly experienced lawyer and former judge, would not be able to put out of his mind any extraneous or irrelevant matters and deal with the ideas impartially. So he said he would be able to do that. Is because he's had the experience, and I think that's a fair call. And in most fair-minded people's mind, they would think, well, yes, look, a former judge, you know, someone who is used to ruling things in and out of their own mind and having to make a fair decision, I kind of understand where he's coming from with that. The other point about the matter is that the Royal Commission, the point of it was to look at union leadership and bring them under the same sort of legislation and rules that company CEOs have to fall within. And I think that to some extent and purpose would probably be a good thing, given that we've had things like the Craig Thompson scandal, we've had numerous union scandals, and you know, I think that was the other arm of this, was looking at, you know, how does that framework need to be changed?
Well, I'm not sure that in fact is necessarily the case. I think that
okay.
partly that's itself a political rationalisation for the inquiry. There are other ways in which a government might have approached that sort of issue, whether in fact the heads of unions are CEOs in the same way that a head of a business is a CEO. That in itself is an interesting question, and whether they need to be held accountable in quite the same way. Certainly they need to be accountable to, in the way in which a CEO is accountable to their shareholders. Then one would expect that the head of a union should be accountable to their membership.
Yes.
And I'm not sure that the two things are necessarily identical, but the shall we say, the lines of accountability in each organisation definitely need to be much more securely established. But the whole exercise really is, as I said before, the establishment of this Royal Commission by this government has been more of a political exercise, and it's had its effect. It's every time something negative has come out, it sort of puts the leader of the opposition in a more negative light politically. And given where, if we look at the sort of the polls at the moment, given where the Prime Minister is in terms of preferred Prime Ministership, the popularity, shall we say, and where the leader of the opposition is, there's hardly anything between them. The leader of the opposition is sort of pretty well as unpopular as the Prime Minister, so damaging the credibility, shall we say, of the leader of the opposition means that the government and the leader, that is to say the Prime Minister, has a chance of boosting his own standing in the polls.
How will Dyson Heydon's decision impact future royal commissions and potentially how they are handled? The ACTU has come out and said that you know, it's now terminally tarnished, this particular royal commission. Do you think this will have a ripple effect into the future when people are named to head a royal commission?
No, not really.
Okay.
I mean, basically there have been numerous royal commissions in the past where there's been controversy or suggestions that the Royal Commissioner, or even the panel of Royal Commissioners in some cases, have been hand-picked to ensure that the government gets the outcome that it wants. This is more or less blatant depending on the skill and finesse of the Prime Minister and his or her government, but basically this won't necessarily affect future Royal Commissioners. This is sort of part and parcel of setting up Royal Commissions, the conduct of Royal Commissions, and the people who chair these Royal Commissions are always being accused of some degree of partisanship, particularly by those that they perhaps might expose as having done some wrongdoing.
Right.
Whether that's the case this time around is another matter, but certainly the controversy over Justice Heydon's presiding over this commission isn't necessarily going to mean that there will be a problem in the future.
And it sounds like the lawyers are going to reap the benefits anyhow, because they're going to be brought in. I think the unions are going to go and seek now legal advice on his decision to stay. It's such
Royal Commissions, Meryl, are largely shall we say, so I'm not quite sure how to word this, but they're a sort of boon for lawyers. They're not necessarily a boon
Exactly.
for anyone else.
Exactly. Dr. Jim Jones, Associate Professor in Politics at the University of Newcastle. Thanks, as always, for your time, and we'll catch
My
up with
pleasure,
you
Mel.
next week for our weekly dose of politics. 2NURFM.